Hi guys, Ren here and welcome to the workshop. Today I want to talk about the 1x setup on my time trial bike. When I was talking about my switch to Shimano group sets, a couple of people have pointed out and asked about this 1x conversion or the conversion in general. And there were many questions and misconceptions regarding it, so I decided to make this video because it's really not as complicated as it sounds. So what I did to convert my bike to a 1x setup with Durace Di2, well, nothing really, because I've set it up initially as 1x. There's no special thing you need to do. All you need to do is not install the front mech and the wiring for it. And in the case of this particular frame, it's also about the front mech hanger, etc. So yeah, that's just about it. Couldn't really be any simpler. If you already have a bike with a front mech installed, then yeah, what you need to do is to take that front mech, remove it, preferably remove the cable as well, or tape up the end so it doesn't corrode, and hide it in the frame. Also preferably in a way that you can access it later on if you need the front mech at some point. And it's as simple as that. There has been one comment stating that first, before you need to do that, you need to deactivate the front mech. That's just not true. You know, there's no way to deactivate it. If it's installed, it works. And if it's not, then of course it can't. And then furthermore, there was a comment about synchro shift. Well, if you have synchro shift enabled on your current bike, and if it's a time trial bike with Di2 with these latest switches, then synchro shift is the only option. In that case, again, there's no need to disable synchro shift, because if the system doesn't recognize a front mech, then obviously there's no synchro shift after all. Then another common misconception that I get questions about is the crank. How do you get a 1x crank? Well, there's no such thing. I've pointed this out a couple of times, but I will say it again because it keeps popping up. There is no 1x crankset for road, at least not in the standard componentry, except something like the 3T turno, etc. That would be really 1x specific. What you have is a standard crankset, in this case with the probably most common standard 5x130mm BCD, and use this, and you take off a double chainring setup such as this one. You remove these and you put on a single chainring in place of the outer ring. Sometimes these rings are offset to get the chain line more in line with the middle of the cassette. For time trialing, that's not really necessary, because that's not where you're going to spend most of the time, hopefully. And in some cases you have to add spacers or shorter bolts, because otherwise they will be too long to grip the one chainring. SRAM supplies these spacers, which are pretty neat, but instead I decided to cut the nuts off by a couple of millimeters, because then you don't need to use the spacers and it's all flush. It's neater, marginally more aerodynamic, and yeah, just looks better. So that's about the crank compatibility. One thing you do need, however, is specific teeth for your 1x chainring, because a double chainring is designed in a way that it can shift, that the chain can jump up and down between the chainrings, so it has kind of ramps and protrusions. The 1x chainring, you want the opposite. You want to make sure that the chain stays on. That's why they have these taller teeth and narrow wide profiles. Different manufacturers use different things, but they generally work very well. Touching on that subject, one person also pointed out why I'm not using the GRX Di2 or something similar rear mech with a clutch. Well, I switched to Shimano to get the most efficient drivetrain possible. Having a clutch mech on there would kind of defeat that point. Why is that? Well, in most conditions, a clutch or a clutch rear mech doesn't add friction, at least not much. But there has been a study about this. It's published in Velo News, done by Friction Facts, I think. And if you really want to have all the marginal gains, you don't want a clutch mech on there. For example, when you shift up into a bigger cog, the chain tension in the lower span increases, and it takes a while for that clutch to go back to its default position, to slide back essentially, and all this time the chain is tensioned in a lower span, and that adds friction. So that's not something you want in a time trial. And yeah, in a time trial, even if you're riding on a flat terrain, you're not shifting too much, but in some situations you do. So you don't want to have those 1 minute windows of higher friction, because yeah, otherwise what's the point of all of this that we're doing? Then secondly, going back to the clutch again, I myself was a tiny bit worried about the chain security for this setup. I've seen many people use it in the time trial scene, so I found that to be okay. Also, going back from the red axis, which has a clutch, although one that works by fluid dampening, so it's kind of a different system, not like Shimano, so that one doesn't eat up the watts that much. Anyway, also I have set the cage tension to the lowest setting, again for minimal friction. And I just kept riding it, and the chain never fell off. Knock on wood, should I say. Why is that? Well, actually I think I did some thinking about this, and I came to two conclusions. So the first thing, of course, narrow wide teeth work. You know, you just can't pull the chain off. Not so easy. And if you look at this training, you see there's an awful lot of these narrow wide teeth, and I think that's the second reason. Because if you imagine a tiny mountain bike chainring like a 36, it doesn't take much of a swooping motion of the chain to get undone because of the small diameter. But on this, if you have to imagine that again, there has to be a huge downwards and sidewards motion just to dislodge that chain. It's you know, not really all that easy to do because of the large diameter. And then secondly, coming back to the large diameters, I have the oversized pulley wheel system in here. Yes, it doesn't help that it's at the lowest cage tension setting, which itself is much lower than the standard. But again, you have much larger pulleys here. There's actually a lot more inertia in there. Maybe it's marginal, but could be, or could have some of an effect anyway. So again, it's not so easy to have it jump around like a small cage. So these are the two factors that I came to. And then final questions were about the gearing itself. This is a 58 chainring by Pyramid Cycling, one of the best brands regarding this, or these TT specialist chainrings. I use that with regular 11 to 28 cassette. Mind you, I'm using a SRAM Red 11-speed cassette. The reason for that is Shimano cassettes have this annoying jump in the middle, and SRAM cassettes have it more spread out, so the bigger jumps are towards the end of the cassette, while with Shimano Di2 jumps start in the middle. I never really noticed that, but when you go back from the super smooth 12-speed experience to 11-speed, I did, and it annoyed me. So I digged up some old red cassettes, and there they go. They're also silent compared to Shimano. They're noisy because they don't have these rubber damping rings on them, and yeah, they're lighter too. So win-win, or win-win-win, should I say. Now, of course, this is not gearing for every situation. If you have a technical course with a steep hill climb, it's not going to be ideal even if the gear ratio is low enough, because if you spend, of course, a reasonable amount of time in the most extreme cog combination, then you incur some pretty big wattage losses or friction losses at exactly the point where you want them to be the least, because that's where you will be putting out the most power. In that case, of course, a double is still a good option, even if it's a tightly spec'd one like this 5642 or this 52, or sorry, 5440. Again, with electronic drivetrains you can shift them around. For flat and kind of undulating courses where no slow sections are expected, then yeah, 1x is the win in terms of aerodynamics, lightweight, etc. Also, a couple of you have pointed out that there have been some tests where 1x drivetrains were less efficient than 2x. Well, there's a big caveat in that. In that test, they did what I call a compensation setup. So that means they had a smaller front chainring, a bad thing, and a wider range cassette. Not necessarily a bad thing, but they simulated a situation where you wanted to get the same range out of a 1x setup that's equivalent to a standard double setup. This is not what we do in time trial specific 1x setups. All we do here is just get rid of the gears you don't need, those slow speed gears, which means the little ring. So a bigger ring, more efficient, and not having these gubbins in here, also more efficient. Yeah. So yeah, in this case, of course, the chaining size doesn't decrease, so you get no increase in friction, quite the opposite. This is what we want. Okay, so I hope this addresses all your questions about 1x setups and this particular use case. If you want to know more about my bike setup, then of course tune into the channel later on. It's all for today. Thanks for watching and see you next time.